All right, team. So we have decided as a district that all students will have access to recess this year. And that means that recess cannot be taken away for any reason. So we've been looking at the research, and it really is showing us that unstructured breaks are good for students to develop positive social interactions, to be able to have that much needed break from the cognitive demands of your classrooms, and also it's good for their general physical health. Additionally, it's in alignment with our goals because the evidence shows that school climate is improved when students have access to recess.
So, with the option no longer available to hold a student in from recess, we really need to take a look at our reactive plan as part of our primary plan. I know last year we had over 300 office discipline referrals, and I'd really like to see that number come down.
I feel like the Ci3T plan addresses inappropriate behavior and that it really shifts the focus away from responding to problem behaviors after they occur and really preventing behaviors from occurring.
Yeah, it's like, from what I understand about PBIS, you teach the behaviors that'll help students be successful in the classroom, and then teachers and faculty, they reinforce that behavior when students meet those expectations.
I really like the idea of acknowledging students who are doing well. I mean, if you have a kid that's slightly off track, if they see other kids getting acknowledgement by adults or their peers even for doing the right thing, it might make them want to turn around and display those appropriate behaviors.
I think that positive reinforcement works, but I also think that there needs to be consequences for those bad behaviors. So if a student is defiant or disrespectful, there should be a consequence for that. Like, that's what happens in real life. But if I can't keep a student in during recess, then what can I do?
As we begin to think about the idea of consequences, this is a great opportunity to really refresh all educators on what a consequence is. When we think about a three-term contingency about learning about behavior, we know that there's certain antecedents that set the stage for a behavior to occur. So for example, a teacher might say, today we're going to do X, and then that's going to prompt the behavior of students engaging in that. Consequences are actually simply the things that follow after a behavior occurs, and that is where the real learning occurs. So if I demonstrate a behavior, I really don't know if it's being reinforced until I see whether or not that behavior actually increases in the future. So when people say that, a kid needs more consequences, this is actually indication of a misunderstanding of what a consequence is. A consequence is simply what happens after a behavior occurs that either increases the future probability or decreases the future probability of that behavior occurring. Sometimes people confuse the idea of consequence and punishment. In a PBIS model where we're really focusing on teaching new behaviors, we want to support the use of these new skill sets that are being taught to help students and be able to solicit reinforcement naturally in the environment. And we also want to create a situation where it is not a punishment-based approach. So we're actually looking for consequences that support student learning. And so we don't want them to be punishment-based, which is introducing an aversive, because that's actually not in a student's best interest. It might get you a really short-term return in terms of what you're looking for, like by yelling at a student or embarrassing some people will say, well, I want to do that because they stop immediately. But in actuality, that's not teaching them anything new. And it actually breeds aggression in this thing called spontaneous recovery, where that behavior will kind of resurge out of what appears to be nowhere. And instead, we want to move away from punishment-based approaches that may appear to work in the short term, but we really want to skill build. So we want to think about consequences as simply things that are occurring after a behavior occurs to shape the behavior in the future. So for example, if a student is off task or disruptive in the classroom, we really want to think about a path in which we can respond to that student's behavior in a new way to help them get their needs met. So you might think about ways to keep instruction moving forward and showing empathy, incorporating instructional choices, and that those are consequences for when misbehavior occurs that are very supportive and moving forward. Some people are looking for like the checklist for life, as far as like, here's the 8 things I need to do every time a student misbehaves. But an important thing thing that the research community has learned is that it's not just responding in a negative way when behaviors that are undesirable occur on the part of a student. We as teachers need to remember that our first response when challenging behaviors occur is actually going to predict whether or not those behaviors tend to escalate or whether or not they de-escalate.